Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Legislative Matters Now with M&M. I'm Morgan Spicer, Special Projects Coordinator here at the ARC of the Mid-Ohio Valley.
And I'm Melissa Southall, Self-Advocate Coordinator for People First in the ARC of the Mid-Ohio Valley. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started with today's show, it's hard to believe we're starting our second year, Morgan.
Yes, it is. We have interviewed many guests from City Council to state legislators to U.S. Senators and their staff, plus other government officials, Secretary of State, and more.
We also have interviewed a lot of self-advocates who are using their skills to be more independent and who are advocating for a better life for themselves or others. We call them advocates in action. We're always looking for more, so if you would like to be on the show to share what you are doing, please let us know, and thank you to everyone who has been on to share their story.
As we begin our second year, we may have some new viewers. Because of that, let me explain that the purpose of this show is to educate all self-advocates, including myself and Melissa, on the ever-important topic of legislative advocacy. We do this by having a guest each month talk about various pieces of legislation. And as Melissa just said, we also, on many programs, depending on the topic and time allowed, do a segment called Advocate in Action, where we talk to a self-advocate who is using their self-advocacy skills in a positive light to not only influence their lives, but the lives of others around them.
Today we are featuring a special guest who will be talking about legislation as it applies to the governor's office. Before we go to who you're going to call, we want to talk about the timeline of a bill getting passed.
Yes, Melissa, it's important to understand because the whole legislative process can be confusing. Our job is to clarify things so they make sense to you. So let's break down the timeline of a bill's journey through the legislature. You can find this information and timeline at the West Virginia Legislators website at www.wvlegislator.gov.
First, we need to talk about the people involved. A citizen legislature represents West Virginia, while lawmakers are elected by the people to serve as their representative voice in government. They are also professionals in other occupations. This is known as part-time legislature.
They meet several times per year for 1 to 3 days in what is known as interim sessions, and then for 60 days of a regular session. It is a bicameral legislature, which is a fancy word that means that it consists of two bodies, which are the Senate and the House of Delegates. 34 senators and 100 delegates represent state citizens who live in specific areas called districts. These districts are divided according to population and may change if census figures show growth or loss of population.
Right now, West Virginia has 17 senatorial districts and 67 delegate districts. Each citizen in the state has representatives in both the Senate and the House. Now we told you in an earlier program that will change next year due to the 2020 U.S. Census and the state changing so that there will be only one person per House district.
State senators serve 4-year terms, with half of the seats up for election every 2 years, while all of the House of Delegates serve 2-year terms. The leader of the Senate is called the Senate President, and the leader of the House is called the Speaker. They run the daily sessions.
Now that we know the people involved, let's talk about the bills. The first step of getting a bill passed would be the introduction of the bill to the Senate or House of Representatives.
Second, it is referred to a committee by the House Speaker or the Senate President.
Third, the committee considers the bill.
The committee then reports the bill to the members of the House of the Senate.
It is then read a first time amended, which means changes are made to it if needed, and then read a second time.
Then it is read a third time. Members debate if they want to, and then they vote on the bill.
To become law, a bill has to pass both chambers. That means if a bill passes in the Senate, it also has to pass the House. And in the same way, if it passes the House, it still has to pass the Senate, and both versions of the bill have to be the same. If each chamber passes a different version, they have a conference committee to work out the differences. This is done with the Speaker or the President, the committee, and action by the House or Senate.
Now, if it has passed both chambers, then it goes to the governor's office. The legislature may vote to override the veto, and the bill becomes law without the governor's approval. But we'll cover more information on that coming up. So now that we've explained how a bill gets passed, it's time for Who You Gonna Call.
Today on Who You Gonna Call, what role does the governor play in legislation besides just signing or vetoing bills? And where do you find that information out? Do you call your city council member, your state House of Delegates and state senators, your U.S. senator or U.S. Congress member, or the West Virginia governor's office? What do you think, Melissa?
I say the governor's office.
Morgan?
The governor's office.
All right, is that your final answer?
Final answer.
Yes, final answer.
You are correct. The governor's office. The West Virginia legislature is the legislative branch of government, and the governor's office is the administrative branch. That includes several departments called his cabinet, including the Department of Administration, Arts and Culture and History, Commerce, Economic Development, and many others. The governor also has a staff. The staff includes the chief of staff, the General Counsel, which are attorneys to make sure things follow state law, Director of Governmental Affairs, Senior Advisor for Federal Affairs and Outreach, and the Director of Constituent Services, constituents being the people. Going back to General Counsel, which involves today's show, is also known as the Chief Legal Office, and they have several attorneys. They assist the governor when it comes to creating bills that the governor wants passed, and also making sure that bills that come to the office to be signed are in line with state code.
To better explain what happens to legislation after it gets to the governor's office of West Virginia, today's guest will talk about this topic. We are joined by Garner Marks. Garner is the Deputy General Counsel at the State of West Virginia's Office of the Governor. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Let's get to the questions. Melissa, let's start us off.
Sure, Morgan. To start off, could you please explain the governor's role in the legislation?
As I understand it, you guys have already talked to the House and the Senate, so you know what they do. Our purpose, or our main role for the legislative session, is to review the bills that the legislature passed and make sure everything is legal and correct and went through the correct chain, and then we either sign or veto those bills. It's the governor's duty in law to enforce the bills, the laws that the legislature passed. So the governor and his agencies implement the bills that the legislature pass.
How does the governor get a bill passed if they aren't in the legislative branch?
So although we are not in the legislature, although it's their role to pass the bills, the governor does have the ability to suggest bills and ideas to the legislature. And it's my job and the people I worked with job to get it passed through the legislature. This year, the governor has about 20 bills that he has submitted to the legislature, different ideas, his agenda that he has submitted to the legislature. And like I said, it's our job to work with the legislature to to pass those bills that are called by request of the executive, which is the governor. He is the chief executive of the state of West Virginia. So, like I said, we've got about 20 of those bills that we're working through right now, and they just got introduced after the governor had his State of the State address. Most of them have to do with efficiency, and like we were just discussing, there are all kinds of people on the governor's staff, and we have 10 or 12. I'm trying to think of the number of, I should know it, the number of agencies we have. But even beyond agencies, we have independent agencies that don't directly respond to the governor. So the governor has a number of different branches underneath him who all have cabinet secretaries, and they have more people working underneath them. So over time, a lot of different boards and people who end up doing the same thing, two different groups of people doing the same thing, both doing the same thing that could be one single entity doing that one thing. What we did is we went through all of the giant state government organizational chart and figured out where we could be more efficient. So we're combining a couple of boards who do the same or similar things to create government efficiencies. That is a major goal of the governor this session, is to make sure that we don't have people working against each other or doing the same thing in two different ways. So just making I would say about half of our bills have to do with government efficiencies. There are a number of other ones. I'm trying to think. I worked mostly on the government efficiencies ones. Legislative proposals from the governor and from citizens all across the state all year round. So all year round we are working on putting these bills together. Because a lot of the law that as you said, it's very complicated. It all works together, and if you pull a pin in one place, a whole stack of cards falls down in another place. So it does take some time to figure out how to make things work properly. But the real heavy legislative push, and when my General Counsel, Berkeley Bentley, and I take the bills to the governor for his review, it's usually about 2 or 3 months prior to 2 or 3 months before the session starts.
What happens when a bill gets passed by the legislature? Is it printed out or delivered electronically?
There is an electronic record on the website, the legislature's website, but when the bill gets passed, it actually does show up to our office in a little blue printed out book. There are a number of them that we get a copy, the House gets a copy, the Senate gets a copy, and there's a copy to the Secretary of State. So there are multiple blue books, and I actually meant to go down to our other office to grab one so that I could show it to you, but I didn't get a chance to run down there. We've actually got 2 bills so far this legislative session that have completely passed through both houses, the House and the Senate, and have been delivered to the executive for review and signature. We are going through that process right now, and there will be 2 bills that we'll have to sign or veto tomorrow. That's the deadline that we have. I've got them right here. I don't have the blue books, but when we receive the blue books, what my staff and I do, we put together this packet, this folder, which has all these papers in it, that is called the legislative history. So it's got the introduced version of the bill, any changes, any committee substitutes, and it shows how many of the senators voted for it, how many of the members of the House voted for it, And we go through the entire legislative history to make sure that all the correct language made it in, all the correct amendments made it in, and that everything makes sense. And so we've got these packets. There are last year 375 bills passed. So we had 375 of these manila folders that we went through, each and every one of them. Some of them were this tall. And we go through and check each bill and make sure each one has been properly recorded. So these are the two bills that will need to be signed tomorrow. I'm sure that they're not super exciting. The first one relates generally to the state's savings and investment programs. So it has to do with savings accounts for education programs, and it's updating some of the language and some of the terms used in our various education savings accounts. And the next one is allowing poll workers to work full or half days. So when an election is going on, you've got poll workers who handle the ballot box for us. It was just a function of code that they could either work a full day or not at all. And that we've had some trouble getting poll workers in. So we're allowing people to work half days, which it seems kind of like a very small thing for so many people to come in so that we can say people can work a half day. But that's how government works.
Does the governor have to sign it?
Once the bill has been received, and once we decide that everything is okay, we can sign that bill, and it becomes effective on the effective date in the bill, which we'll address later. But if the governor decides for some reason he doesn't want to sign the bill, we can, if after 5 days after that we've been delivered the bill becomes law without the governor's signature. So sometimes that is the case. Now, on the opposite side, if we decide there is a problem with the bill, if it's unconstitutional or it's an amendment got left out somewhere in the process or the title is wrong and misleading, we can actually veto the bill. If we veto the bill, there are a few things that can happen. A veto essentially means no. It means we don't agree with this, and so a veto means we deny your bill, essentially.
Does a veto kill the bill?
And the answer is generally yes, but not necessarily always. If the governor decides to veto something, he can say it's for a technical error. We have done in the past, written a letter with our veto message that specifies what the error was, what our problem with it was, and invites the legislature to change that and pass the bill again and send it back to us. Last year, there was one of those bills. Alternatively, if we have a problem with the bill that we don't think can be fixed, it's not a simple error, we can veto the bill and just leave it at that. But the legislature can override a veto with a simple majority, which means it just has to repass through the House and Senate. Now, most bills, that is, if the legislature is still in session. So if they were to pass something before the last 5 days of session, and we vetoed it before the last 5 days of session while they're still in session, they could theoretically repass the bill and override our veto. That hasn't happened in the time that I've been here, but I'm sure it does happen from time to time. We do not have a pocket veto like the president does. It's actually the opposite. If we elect not to sign something after 5 days after we receive it, it automatically becomes law. There's also what's called a line item veto, which means the governor could go through and find one specific line in a bill that he doesn't like, write that out, cross that out, write veto next to it, and sign the rest of it. We don't have that power for normal bills. We do have that power when it comes to the budget bill, however. So the budget bill is one of those bills that I was talking about that's, 3 inches thick. It's very, 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 very large. It's every state dollar that gets spent all across the state by the government. So we do have the ability to go in there and make changes. But in bills of general application, like we went through, we do not have the line item veto, and we have the opposite of a pocket veto.
Why do some bills go into effect immediately while others take 30 days or longer?
The default is actually 90 days. So any bill that comes out of what's called legislative bill drafting, which is where there's one group of people that the governor and all 134 legislators upstairs have to send to legislative services. They go through and type out the bill and make sure that it looks correct. Their default is 90 days. Some bills say if you're making something illegal,
I never heard that.
a bill that makes a certain action illegal, there's not a whole lot of people in the background making that bill work. It just is or is not illegal on that day. A bill like that lends itself to being made effective on passage, is what it's called. And the legislature, once the bill has passed, they have to make a motion to make a bill effective on passage, and they vote on that again. And so if the Senate passes it and doesn't make it effective on passage, but the House decides they would like to, they still have to send that bill all the way back over to the Senate so the Senate can agree that the bill will be effective on passage. So there are other types of bills where, say, there's a whole department at the Department of Health and Human Resources. There's a whole subgroup of people who have an entire form that they have to fill out, and there's a whole process of the way that this form has to process through the agency. It takes those people some time to rework that process if they're amending that bill. For example, the bill about our savings plans. It is some bills that require a process. That bill's effective on passage, so they must have decided that the agencies don't need that lead time, that time to set up to prepare the agency to implement the rule. And that's where the 90 days or 30 days or 60 days from passage can come in handy. If the agency needs time to prepare themselves to implement the new law.
If the governor doesn't originate legislation, should people still call, write, and send letters and personal stories? Or should all those calls and emails, etc., all go to members of the West Virginia House and West Virginia Senate?
Like I said, as we discussed, the governor, although he doesn't have the power to introduce a bill himself, he can and does often request that bills be introduced on his behalf. So there are, the governor's office often takes calls from people around the state with these personal stories or requests or interests, and we're happy to take those calls and work with those individuals and their representatives to get things accomplished and to make necessary changes as the process moves along. With that said, however, we always say that in addition to reaching out to the governor's office, people should always consider looking up their local representatives and reaching out to them directly. It's always helpful to have a good working relationship with your local representative. And very often those local representatives call me or some other people in my office to work out getting solutions for people. So
thank you so much for joining us today and helping self-advocates understand the ins and outs of legislation and the governor's office in West Virginia.
Yes, thank you for having me. Very good questions. I hope it was helpful. And really happy that you all invited us to come and talk for a while.
If you have any important pieces of legislation you would like for us to feature on a future episode, please reach out to us and we will help. We'll be glad to help. You call the ARC at 304-422-3151, or you can call me or Morgan directly. My email is melissa.southall@peoplefirstwv.org.
And I can be reached at morgan.spicer@thearcmov.org. We would love to hear from you.
Agreed, Morgan. We want to thank our guests today, Garner Marks from the Office of the Governor in West Virginia.
Yes, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I can't believe that it's been a year already. This is our second year of doing Legislative Matters Now with M&M. And I must say, I can't wait to bring out more guests, have more advocates. It's going to be a great year, I think.
I think it will too, Morgan.
And I love doing this. I can't wait to do another year of it.
I do too. I enjoy doing this.
Yes, I definitely do. I love talking to all those guests and those advocates. So
I've learned a lot in the last year.
Thanks so much for joining us. Here's to another year. And remember, advocacy matters.
And so do you.
See you next time.
Bye.